A millionaire businessman had always carried the pain of being abandoned without explanation by the woman he loved 7 years ago. He married another, but he never managed to forget his former neighbor. One Saturday morning, an 8-year-old girl in ragged clothes knocked on his door, desperately pleading, "Uncle, please, can you read this letter for me? I don't know how to read." He recognized the child as the daughter of his former neighbor and moved with compassion, agreed to help her. As he read the first lines, his hands began to sweat. But when he reached the end of the message, his legs trembled and he had to lean against the wall. Arthur Sterling felt the weight of the silence like a thick, dusty velvet cloak. On that Saturday morning, the mansion of glass walls and Italian marble felt more like a showcase for his achievements than a home. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating works of art worth a fortune, but it couldn't warm the chill that had settled in his chest 7 years ago. He stirred the black coffee in his fine porcelain cup, the clinking of the silver spoon echoing in the emptiness of a dining room designed for 20. His vast fortune, reflected in corporate balance sheets and brokerage statements, was a mountain of paper and numbers that couldn't fill the void in his soul. At 40, he was a self-made multimillionaire who had built an empire, yet he felt like the poorest of men. The memory of her came as it always did, stealthy and sharp. Eliza. The smell of damp earth from her simple garden, the smile that lit up her makeup-free face, the touch of her calloused hands. They had been neighbors, worlds apart, separated only by a stone wall. He, already a rising businessman. She, a woman who found wealth in the small things. And for a time, those worlds had merged into a love that seemed indestructible, until, without warning, without a single word of explanation, she had closed herself off. The windows of her modest house were shut to him. Her eyes would avert his on the street, and her silence became a torture that time had not healed. A sharp, insistent sound shattered his melancholy. The doorbell, not the main one, but the one at the service entrance. A chime he rarely heard. He frowned. Saturday. He wasn't expecting anyone. Beatrice, his wife, was at her weekend yoga retreat, and the staff had clear instructions not to be disturbed. With a sigh of resignation, he stood up, the designer chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. He crossed hallways that felt more like museum galleries and opened the heavy wooden door. Before him, small and fragile against the imposing entryway, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her clothes were worn, a tear in the sleeve of her faded dress revealing a scraped elbow. Her face, smudged with dirt and perhaps dried tears, was framed by tangled brown hair. But it was her eyes that held him, large, frightened, and yet sparking with a fierce determination. She held out a trembling hand, clutching a crumpled, yellowed envelope as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Sir!" Her voice was a trembling whisper, yet heavy with urgency. "Please, you have to read this letter for me. It's very important. I don't know how to read." Arthur froze. A wave of initial annoyance was quickly swallowed by something deeper. An instinctive compassion he kept under lock and key. He looked at the child's dirty face, at the raw anguish in her eyes, and saw a vulnerability that mirrored his own. This girl didn't want his money. She wasn't asking for a handout. She was asking for help, a simple, primal kind of help. He hesitated for a moment, the world of stocks, profits, and mergers suddenly feeling distant and meaningless. With a slow gesture, he reached out his hand. "Give me the letter." "Oh, kid," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. She handed him the envelope with a relief that was almost palpable. Her fingers brushed against his, and an inexplicable jolt, a sense of familiarity, shot up his arm. He looked down at the envelope in his hands, a cold premonition creeping up his spine, having no idea that the words contained on that fragile paper were about to demolish the world he knew. Arthur closed the door behind him, the sound of the deadbolt echoing like the ceiling of a tomb. The girl, now seen in the filtered light of the grand foyer, seemed even smaller and more out of place amidst the vastness of marble and dark wood. She stared at everything with wide eyes, not with the covetousness of admiration, but with the astonishment of someone seeing a world that shouldn't exist. To her, these expensive objects, the paintings on the wall worth more than the entire street she lived on, were just strange and intimidating. Arthur felt a pang of discomfort, the opulence of his life suddenly seeming vulgar and offensive. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Come in, please. Sit here," he said, gesturing to a wine-colored velvet armchair. The girl took a hesitant step back, as if the rich fabric might stain her or she might soil it. "No, sir. The letter. You need to read it." The urgency in her voice was a reminder that this was not a social call. He nodded, surprised by her stubbornness. He led her into the living room, but she remained standing, tense, while he sat on the edge of his own sofa. With fingers that were used to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, he tore open the yellowed envelope with uncharacteristic care. The letter was written on thin, lined paper from a school notebook, and the hurried, uneven script betrayed the desperation of its author. He began to read silently. "Mr. Sterling, forgive me for the audacity of writing to you. My name is Joan. I'm Eliza's neighbor. I'm writing because there's no one else to turn to. Last night, Eliza collapsed. She hadn't been well for days, but she's stubborn and didn't want to go to a doctor and spend the little money she had. An ambulance took her to City General Hospital, the only one that would take her. It's far. The doctors said her condition is serious, something with her heart, and that she'll need to be hospitalized for a long time, maybe even have surgery." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. Eliza. The name leaped off the page and drove itself into his chest like a shard of ice. He lifted his eyes from the letter and stared at the girl. Now he saw it. It wasn't just a vague familiarity. It was the shape of her eyes, the gentle curve of her chin, the way a lock of hair fell across her forehead. They were Eliza's eyes. Eliza's face, in a miniature version, marked by poverty and worry. Dizziness hit him. Of course. How had he not seen it before? This was her daughter, the daughter of the woman he had loved and who had abandoned him without a word. He forced his eyes back to the paper, his hands trembling slightly. Old anger and the pain of rejection battled with the overwhelming concern that was flooding him. Why would she send her daughter to him? After 7 years of cruel silence, why reach out now? The letter continued. "She asked me, before she passed out, that if anything happened, I should deliver this letter to your house. She said you were a good man and that you wouldn't let little Lena be left alone. The girl has no one else, sir. I'm an old sick woman. I can't take care of her. Please, just keep her until Eliza gets better. That's all I ask." Lena. The girl's name was Lena. He looked at her again, and the child took a step back, frightened by the intensity of his gaze. Compassion won. Their history didn't matter now. There was a scared child and a sick woman. He, with all his capital and influence, could help. He could ensure Eliza got the best treatment. He could give this girl a safe place. But there was one last sentence, a postscript scribbled at the bottom of the page, almost as an afterthought, a whispered confession. Arthur leaned in to read the words that would forever blur the line between his past and his present. P.S. Do this for her, Arthur, and for you. There's something you need to know. Lena. She's not just Eliza's daughter. The final sentence of the letter hung in the air, dense and charged with a meaning Arthur couldn't yet fully process, but which was already beginning to corrode the foundations of his reality. She's not just Eliza's daughter. The words echoed in his mind, a dull drumbeat drowning out all other thoughts. He reread the sentence once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition could alter its content or lessen the devastating impact forming in the pit of his stomach. The world around him, the luxurious room, The secure investments, the meticulously constructed life, all of it suddenly seemed fragile, an illusion about to shatter. He slowly raised his gaze, meeting Lena's large brown eyes. The girl watched him with a mixture of fear and childish hope, completely unaware of the earthquake that letter had caused. And then the truth hit him, not as a gentle revelation, but as a violent, unexpected blow. The girl's age, 8 years old. He did the math. His business-trained mind, accustomed to rapid calculations, now working frantically on a personal, painful equation. 7 years since Eliza had left him. 7 years and a pregnancy. The math was simple, cruel, and irrefutable. A buzzing started in his ears. He remembered the last weeks before the end, their love, intense and real. The nights they had dreamed of a future together, a future that he, with his growing wealth, could provide. He remembered the promise of a life far from that working-class neighborhood, a life of security and comfort. And then, her silence. The door slammed in his face. The averted gazes. He had thought it was the money, that she had been frightened by the disparity between their worlds. He had thought she didn't love him enough. He had felt abandoned, betrayed. And now, the possibility of an entirely different truth presented itself, one that painted him not as the victim, but as a man who had been deceived in a much more profound way. "Lena," he said, his voice hoarse, almost a stranger to himself. "Your mother, did she ever talk about me?" The girl shook her head. "No, sir. Mommy never talks about my dad. She just says he went on a long trip and that one day he'll come back." A painful innocence that twisted Arthur's heart even further. He stood up. The letter crumpled in his fist. He needed air. He walked to the immense glass window overlooking the impeccably manicured garden. Outside, the world continued as usual, but for him, everything had changed. The woman he had loved hadn't just abandoned him. She had hidden the most important fact of his life from him. She had denied him the chance to be a father. Why? The question screamed in his mind. Why so much suffering? Why so much secrecy? And then, like a cold shadow cast over the scene, the image of Beatrice. His wife, surfaced in his thoughts. Beatrice, with her calculated elegance, her social ambition, her aversion to anything she considered common. Beatrice, who had found him at his most vulnerable, when the pain of losing Eliza was consuming him. She had comforted him, rebuilt him, convinced him that the future was with her, in a world of luxury and power, a world where the past, especially a humble past, was meant to be buried. He remembered vague conversations, disparaging comments she made about his old neighborhood, about that kind of people. Could she have had something to do with this? The idea was monstrous, almost unthinkable, but the seed of doubt, once planted, began to germinate in soil fertilized by years of an inexplicable melancholy. He turned to Lena, who was still watching him, huddled near the door. The truth was right there, in the flesh, in her frightened face. His daughter, a daughter he never knew existed. Anger and pain, mixed with a new, overwhelming and fierce feeling, a protective instinct. This girl was his, and her mother was in a hospital, alone and in danger. The lies, the manipulations, whoever was behind them, they would have to wait. Right now, only two things mattered: the woman he once loved and the daughter he had just found. "Come on, Lena," he said, his voice now firm, his decision made. "Let's get you some things. And then I need to make some calls. We need to take care of your mother." He reached out his hand to the girl, but before he could touch her, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Beatrice. "Thinking of you, my love. Can't wait to get back to our perfect life." The irony of the words hit him like a physical blow, and he realized the battle he was about to fight wasn't just for his new family, but against the very life he had built. Arthur ignored Beatrice's message. the text glowing on the screen like a beacon from a life that no longer felt like his. The word perfect sounded hollow, a blatant lie in the face of the raw, frightened truth standing in his living room. He put the phone away, feeling its weight in his pocket, a link to the world he would have to deceive, at least for now. The first step was to care for Lena. The girl followed him at a respectful distance, her small, bare feet making an almost inaudible sound on the cold marble floor. He led her to the guest wing, a hallway of 4 lavishly but impersonally decorated suites that were rarely used. He opened the door to one of the rooms, revealing a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, solid wood furniture, and a bathroom larger than Eliza's entire living room. Lena stopped at the doorway, her eyes wide, not with desire, but with sheer panic. "I can't stay in here," she whispered. Her voice choked. "I'll get everything dirty." Arthur's heart constricted. Her innocence, her awareness of her own poverty was more painful than any accusation. "Don't worry about that," he said gently. "This house is big. A little dirt won't hurt it. You need a bath and some clean clothes. Then we'll get something to eat." While the girl showered, the sound of running water muffling the house's oppressive silence, Arthur went to his office. He sat in his leather chair, the same one where he made decisions that affected the capital flow of his companies. But now his mind was focused on a much more urgent problem. He picked up the phone and called City General Hospital. Bureaucracy was a wall. He wasn't a relative. He had no authorization. Frustration consumed him. He, a man who could move mountains with a phone call, was powerless. He insisted, used his lawyers' names, talked about transferring Eliza to the best private hospital in the city. The nurse on the other end of the line, though sympathetic, was firm. Family only. He slammed the phone down on the desk. Family. He was family, but he couldn't prove it. And the only person who could confirm it was unconscious or too sick to speak. A feeling of claustrophobia enveloped him. He was trapped. He had a daughter under his roof, a child who legally wasn't his, and her mother was in danger, beyond his reach. The situation was a tangled mess, and every attempt to unravel it only seemed to tighten the knot. Lena came out of the bathroom wrapped in a fluffy towel that was nearly her size. Her face was clean, revealing even more delicate features, even more like Eliza's. Arthur had left some clothes on the bed that he'd had an employee buy in a hurry, a simple, comfortable dress. Seeing her in new, clean clothes, yet still looking like a frightened bird in a gilded cage, reinforced his determination. He couldn't fail her. He took her to the kitchen where the cook, Helena, a kind-faced, white-haired woman who had worked for him for years, had already prepared a meal. Lena ate in silence, with a restrained voracity that revealed a long-held hunger. Arthur watched her every move, every furtive glance she cast his way, trying to decipher the child who was his daughter. What had her life been like? What hardships had she and Eliza faced while he lived in his world of luxury and false melancholy? Guilt gnawed at him. That afternoon, he tried to create an impossible normality. He showed Lena the library, the gardens, the pool. She followed him like a shadow, silent and observant. Her silence was a mirror of Eliza's, and with every passing hour, the girl's presence in his house became a heavier, more dangerous secret. Beatrice would be back the next day. What would he say? How would he explain the presence of an unknown child in his house? The idea of lying to his wife, something he had never done, now seemed not only necessary, but inevitable. He was entering uncharted territory, a labyrinth of lies to protect a truth he had barely begun to understand. And at the center of that labyrinth was the question that wouldn't leave him. Who had put him here? Was it Eliza, out of desperation? Or was there another, more sinister hand moving the pieces of this cruel game? Night fell on the mansion, but brought no peace. For Arthur, the darkness only amplified the torrent of thoughts lashing at him. He put Lena to bed in the guest room. the girl curling up in the immense bed like a castaway on an island. Before falling asleep, she took his hand, her small fingers closing around his with a fragile trust. "Do you think Mommy will get better soon?" she asked, her voice sleepy. The simple question, filled with pure hope, was like a knife in his chest. "Yes, sweetie, I'll do everything I can," he answered. The promise meant as much for himself as for her. He closed the door softly and went down to his office, the one place he felt in control. But control was an illusion. He was cornered. The image of Beatrice returning the next day was a storm cloud on the horizon. She was a woman of details, observant and incisive. Lena's presence would not go unnoticed. He needed a story, a plausible excuse to buy time, time to understand, time to act. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his laptop, an email from his investment manager with a report on his stock market performance. Numbers, charts, profit projections, a language he mastered, but which now seemed to belong to another life. He looked at the figures, the digits representing a fortune that could buy almost anything, except the answers he desperately needed. The irony was crushing. He was a master at analyzing the market, predicting trends, and managing risk in his business. But his personal life was a minefield he was navigating blind. A memory of a detail struck him. Joan, the neighbor who wrote the letter, she was the key. Maybe she knew more. Maybe she could fill in the blanks, the 7 years of silence. He grabbed his car keys. It was late, almost midnight, but he couldn't stay still. He had to do something, anything. He drove through the dark, quiet streets, leaving the affluent suburb behind and entering the modest, working-class neighborhood where he had grown up and where Eliza still lived. Her house was dark, a sad silhouette under the faint light of a street lamp. He parked the car at the corner, the engine off, and just watched. This place, once the paradise of his love, was now a monument to his ignorance. How many times had he driven past here in the last 7 years, his heart aching with pain and resentment, never knowing that on the other side of that wall, his daughter was growing up. He found Joan's house, a small duplex next to Eliza's. A dim light shone from under the door. He took a deep breath and knocked. Slow, shuffling footsteps approached, and the door opened a crack, revealing the wrinkled, wary face of an old woman. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice frail. "I'm Arthur Sterling. You wrote me a letter about Eliza." The woman's eyes widened. She opened the door completely. Come in, son. I was praying you'd come." The inside of the house was simple, clean, and smelled of chamomile tea. Joan had him sit in a worn armchair and looked at him with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Eliza never wanted to bother you," she began, her voice trembling. "She's proud, and she was scared, very scared." "Scared of what, Joan? Why did she hide my daughter from me?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Joan hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap. She glanced at the wall separating her from Eliza's house, as if seeking permission. It wasn't out of malice, Mr. Sterling. It was to protect the girl, and to protect herself. Someone made her believe that if you knew about the child, you would take her away. Someone threatened her, told her you'd never forgive her for getting pregnant, that you'd destroy her. Arthur felt the blood run cold in his veins. Threatened? Who would do something so cruel? Who, Joan? Who told her that? The old woman looked down, fear visible on her face. It was a long time ago, right after she started to show. A woman, very elegant, very beautiful. She came here and said she was speaking for you, said you were engaged, that you were building a new life, and that a child from a poor neighbor would ruin everything. She offered Eliza money to disappear, and when Eliza refused, she threatened her. A sharp, terrifying image formed in Arthur's mind. An elegant woman, beautiful. His fiancée at the time, Beatrice. The name exploded in his consciousness, no longer a suspicion, but a venomous certainty. The woman who had consoled him was the one who had engineered his pain. The floor seemed to vanish from under his feet, and he had to grip the arms of the chair to keep from falling. Joan's revelation hit Arthur with the force of a tidal wave. He was breathless, the air in the small room suddenly feeling thin and heavy. Beatrice, the woman with whom he shared his life, his bed, his plans, the woman he believed had rescued him from an abyss of sorrow was, in fact, the one who had pushed him in. Her kindness, her support, the love she professed, it was all a meticulous charade built on the ruins of his happiness. The betrayal was so colossal, so perverse, that his mind refused to fully accept it. Did she introduce herself? Give a name? He asked, his voice a thread, clinging to one last, desperate spark of doubt. Joan shook her head. No, sir, she never said her name, just that she was your fiancée and that you had sent her to solve the problem. Eliza was devastated. She loved you so much. She believed you had discarded her. The shame, the fear, that's why she shut you out. She built a wall around herself and the girl to protect them from the pain she thought you had caused. The last spark of doubt was extinguished. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying precision. Beatrice's hints about his past, her poorly disguised relief when he sold his parents' house in that neighborhood, her insistence on cutting all ties with his old life. It wasn't concern, it was the maintenance of a lie. She had isolated him, molded him, ensuring the truth would never surface. And most cruelly of all, she had used the love he felt for Eliza to poison it, turning it into resentment. He stood up, his mind spinning. The anger he felt was a furnace, so intense it threatened to consume him. He wanted to go home, to confront her, to rip the mask from her face and expose the monster hiding underneath. But then the image of Lena, sleeping peacefully in his house, stopped him. He couldn't explode. Not yet. There was a traumatized child to protect, and there was Eliza, fighting for her life in a hospital. A confrontation now would only bring more chaos. Beatrice was calculating. If cornered, she could become even more dangerous. She could deny everything, turn the tables on him, maybe even try to use the law to take Lena from him before he could prove a thing. "Thank you, Joan," he said, his voice firm, his resolve solidifying amid the emotional turmoil. "You did the right thing. Please, don't mention to anyone that I was here. It's very important." He returned to his car, the silence of the night now heavy with secrets and lies. Driving back to the mansion, the contrast between the two worlds had never seemed so stark. The humble honesty of Joan's house against the deceitful opulence of his own home. The wealth he had accumulated, the dollars in his accounts, the investments in gold and crypto. It all felt tainted, contaminated by the very foundation of his marriage. He had married Beatrice out of gratitude, for comfort. She, on the other hand, had married his net worth, his status, and was willing to destroy lives to secure her position. Entering the house, the silence was the same, but now he heard it differently. It was no longer a melancholy emptiness, but a tense quiet, the calm before the storm. He went upstairs and stopped in front of the room where Lena was sleeping. He opened the door carefully and watched her in the soft glow of a nightlight, her serene face, her steady breathing. A daughter, his daughter, a miracle that had been stolen from him. The love he felt in that moment was visceral, a primal force that anchored him. The rage gave way to a cold, sharp clarity. This war would not be fought with shouts and accusations, but with strategy and intelligence. The same tools he used to dominate the business world. He would protect Lena and Eliza. He would unmask Beatrice, but on his own terms, in his own time. He would let her believe her secret was safe, that her perfect life remained intact. Meanwhile, he would gather the evidence, move the pieces on the board. From this night on, he was no longer the grieving husband, the melancholic tycoon. He was a father, and he would do anything to get back the family that had been taken from him. The game had begun, and he did not intend to lose. Sunday dawned with a pale, grey light, a perfect reflection of Arthur's state of mind. The facade of normality he would have to erect that day felt like the most Herculean task of his life. Lena woke up shy, still disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, but a breakfast of pancakes and orange juice, served by a complicit and caring Helena, brought a small sparkle to her eyes. Arthur watched the scene, his heart torn between the tenderness of discovering this little person and the tension of knowing that at any moment Beatrice would arrive. The front door opened around 11 o'clock. Beatrice's voice, clear and melodious, echoed through the foyer. "Darling, I'm home. The retreat was divine. You should have seen the sunrise over the mountains." Arthur took a deep breath, composing his face into a mask of neutrality. He went to meet her, giving her a restrained kiss on the cheek. "Welcome back. I'm glad you enjoyed it." Beatrice studied him for a moment, her sharp predator's intuition sensing something different in the air. "Is everything all right? You seem distant." Before he could answer, Lena appeared at the entrance to the living room, drawn by the voices. She stopped, her big eyes fixed on Beatrice, holding a glass of juice with both hands. The silence that fell was abrupt and total. Beatrice's smile froze, turning into a hard line. Her eyes flicked from the girl to Arthur, the question in them icy and sharp. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low, devoid of any warmth. Arthur felt Lena's frightened gaze on him. He had rehearsed a story, a lie to buy time. "Beatrice, this is Lena. She's the daughter of a former employee. Her mother was in a serious accident. She's in the hospital, and the girl had nowhere to go. Child Protective Services asked me to help out temporarily." It was a weak story, full of holes, but it was the only one he had. Beatrice didn't take her eyes off him. A flicker of recognition, mixed with a cold calculation, crossed her face. She looked at Lena again, a quick, dismissive scan of the child's simple but clean clothes. For a terrible moment, Arthur thought she would explode, that the charade would end right there, but Beatrice was smarter than that. She took a deep breath, and a smile, forced but convincing to anyone who didn't know her, formed on her lips. "Oh my goodness! What a terrible situation," she said, her voice now dripping with artificial compassion. "Of course, darling, you did the right thing. A child can't be left all alone." She approached Lena, crouching down to the girl's level. "Hello, Lena. I'm Beatrice. I'm so sorry about your mother." Lena, intimidated, just nodded, taking a step back to hide partially behind Arthur's leg. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Beatrice, whose eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before resuming their fabricated sweetness. The rest of the day was a theater of the absurd. Beatrice played the part of the gracious hostess, offering toys, asking about Lena's favorite foods, handling the situation with a disturbing calm. But Arthur saw beneath the mask. He saw the furtive glances she cast, the way her fingers drummed on the table when she thought no one was looking, the tension in her jaw. She was assessing the threat, calculating her next move. The real turning point, however, came that night. Arthur was in his office, trying unsuccessfully to get more information from the hospital, when Beatrice entered without knocking. She closed the door behind her, the click of the lock sounding like a sentence. The smile was gone. Her face was a mask of contained fury. "A former employee," she hissed, her voice like venom. "Do you really think I'm an idiot?" "Arthur, I saw her eyes. I know exactly who she is." She took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "You brought her into my house. After everything I did to protect us, to build our life, you bring your trashy past into my house." The venom in her words, the veiled admission, confirmed everything. Arthur stood up, the calm he had fought so hard to maintain finally shattering. "Your house, protect us from what?" "Beatrice, from my own daughter." Beatrice laughed. A dry, joyless sound. Your daughter, don't be naive. That woman set this whole thing up to get your money, and you, the great tycoon, you fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. She moved closer, her face inches from his. And then she delivered the blow that would change everything, a lie so cruel and calculated it knocked the wind out of him. Besides, it's impossible. Or have you forgotten, darling? You can't have children. The doctor was very clear. Years ago. You're sterile. Beatrice's words fell on Arthur like acid. You're sterile. The sentence echoed in the tense silence of the office, unearthing an old pain, a resignation he had carried for years. He remembered the appointment, shortly after they were married. Beatrice had insisted, saying she wanted to make sure everything was fine before they started trying. He remembered the doctor, a man she had recommended, with a sophisticated clinic and a grave, pitying tone. He remembered the tests and the final diagnosis, delivered with false sympathy, irreversible infertility. He had been devastated. But Beatrice had consoled him, saying it didn't matter, that their love was enough. Another piece of the puzzle snapped into place, revealing a level of manipulation his mind could barely fathom. "The doctor," he began, his voice hoarse, "you were the one who recommended him." A triumphant, cruel smile curved her lips. "I always take care of everything, my love. I made sure there would be no complications, no distractions that could get in the way of our future, the future of our estate." The brazen confession, the coldness with which she admitted to orchestrating the lie that had haunted him for so long, broke something inside Arthur. The anger gave way to a cutting ice. He looked at her, but he no longer saw the woman he had married. He saw a stranger, a predator who had studied his life, identified his weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. She didn't love him. She owned him, his businesses, his fortune, his life. They were assets she managed for her own benefit. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerously calm. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "What? Get out of my office now!" She recoiled, surprised by his firmness. The man she had molded, the melancholic, passive husband, was gone. In his place was someone she didn't recognize, someone with a glint of steel in his eyes. She gave a disdainful smirk, trying to regain control. "Don't forget, Arthur. Half of all this is mine, and I have a reputation to uphold. Our reputation. Think carefully before you do anything stupid." With that veiled threat, she turned and left, leaving him alone with the devastating truth. In the days that followed, the mansion became a silent battlefield, a cold war waged in marble hallways and empty dining rooms. Beatrice kept up appearances, treating Lena with a cloying sweetness whenever Arthur was near, but he saw the looks she shot the girl when she thought no one was watching, looks of pure contempt. Arthur, in turn, played the same game. He acted like the husband he had always been, discussing social calendars and investments while secretly beginning to move his own pieces. The first step was to hire a private investigator, a discreet and efficient man he had used in the past for corporate audits. The mission: find out everything about Eliza's life for the past 7 years, and, crucially, investigate the clinic and the doctor who had diagnosed him as sterile. The second step was to retain one of the best family law attorneys in the country in absolute secrecy. Meanwhile, his main focus was on Lena. The girl, sensitive to the tension in the house, became increasingly withdrawn. She barely ate, and at night Arthur could hear her whimpering softly in her room. Her mother's absence and the hostile environment were taking their toll. One afternoon, he found her sitting in the garden, feverish and listless. Panic seized him. He rushed her to a trusted pediatrician, lying to Beatrice that it was just a routine checkup. The diagnosis was acute stress, manifesting in physical symptoms. The doctor was clear. The girl needed stability and, above all, her mother. The call from the hospital that same night was the blow he had been dreading. It was a doctor from City General. His voice was grave. "Mr. Sterling, I found your number in Miss Eliza's belongings. She's had a complication, a serious infection. Her condition has worsened significantly, and we need to make a decision about a high-risk procedure. We need authorization from a next of kin, but we can't locate anyone. Time is running out." Arthur froze, the phone pressed to his ear. The entire world seemed to stop. On one side, his daughter, sick with longing and stress. On the other, the woman he loved, hovering between life and death, and he legally was nothing to either of them. The charade he was trying to maintain, the Cold War with Beatrice, all of it became irrelevant. The choice he had to make was no longer about strategy or timing. It was about life. To authorize the treatment, he would have to reveal himself. He would have to publicly claim his paternity, detonating the bomb that would destroy his current life, his reputation, and perhaps even his businesses. The silence on the line was deafening, waiting for an answer he didn't know how to give. "I'm her daughter's father." The words left Arthur's mouth before he could think about the consequences. It was an instinctive reaction, a truth he could no longer suppress. On the other end of the line, the doctor paused. "Sir, I understand the situation, but for a procedure of this magnitude, I need legal proof. A birth certificate, a court document." "I don't have one," Arthur interrupted, frustration and desperation sharpening his voice. It's a complicated story, but I am the father. I take full responsibility. Do whatever it takes to save her. I'll cover all the costs. Transfer her to the best hospital. Whatever is necessary. Just don't let her—" The word died in his throat. The doctor, sensing the genuine urgency, relented slightly. "Look, we'll do what we can to stabilize her, but you need to resolve the legal issue as soon as possible. Without formal authorization, our hands are tied regarding more invasive procedures." Arthur hung up, his heart hammering against his ribs. Time had run out. The strategy of waiting and gathering evidence had dissolved in the face of Eliza's life-or-death situation. He knew what he had to do. He found Beatrice in the living room, reading a fashion magazine with an expression of calculated boredom. Her calm was the most violent thing he had ever seen. "Beatrice, we need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. She lowered the magazine slowly, a condescending smile on her lips, finally decided to be reasonable. "Eliza is dying," he said flatly, "and I need to authorize her treatment. I'm going to legally acknowledge my paternity of Lena." Her smile vanished. "You will do no such thing." It wasn't a question, it was an order. "You will destroy everything. Our life, your company. The stock will plummet when the scandal breaks. And the billionaire with an illegitimate child. Think of the humiliation. The only humiliation here is having lived for 7 years in a lie orchestrated by you." He shot back, his composure breaking. "You don't care about my company or my reputation. You care about your cash flow, your social standing. You built our marriage on the suffering of an innocent woman and child." Beatrice stood up, her mask of sophistication falling away to reveal the cruelty beneath. "So what? I saw an opportunity and I took it. You were weak, pathetic, crying over some little nobody who wasn't in your league. I gave you an empire. I gave you a world. And this is how you thank me." "You gave me nothing," Arthur said, his voice low and filled with a deep disgust. You stole my right to be a father. You stole 7 years of my daughter's life. You stole the dignity of the woman I loved. And you did it all for money." The fury in her eyes was that of a dethroned queen. "You will regret this, Arthur. I will drag your name through the mud. I'll tell every newspaper you had an affair, that you abandoned the child. I will use every penny of your precious money to destroy you in court. You'll have nothing, not the company, not the girl." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. Arthur knew she was capable of it. She had the resources and the malice to follow through on every word. He looked at the hate-contorted face of the woman he had slept next to for 7 years and felt a chill. The obstacle wasn't just legal or social, it was Beatrice. She was a wall of power and vengeance between him and his family, and to save Eliza and protect Lena, he would have to go through that wall, no matter the cost. "Do what you have to do, Beatrice," he said. The final decision sealed in his heart. "But I'm not letting Eliza die, and I'm not abandoning my daughter. It's over." He turned to leave, but her voice, now icy and calculating, stopped him. "Just one more thing, darling. Did you think it was a coincidence that I appeared in your life right after she left you? Did you think I just stumbled upon a heartbroken millionaire?" She smiled, a smile that revealed the abyss of her premeditation. "And I researched my investments, Arthur, and you were the best investment of my life. I knew everything I knew about her. I planned every step from the very beginning." Beatrice's final confession was the finishing blow. It hadn't been a thoughtless act of jealousy or an opportunity seized. It had been a cold, calculated operation, a business plan where he and Eliza were just variables to be manipulated for maximum profit. The revelation drained all the anger from Arthur, leaving an icy void in its place. He looked at her, no longer with fury, but with the detachment of a zoologist observing an unknown, venomous species. The love, the anger, the pain, every feeling he'd ever had for her turned to ash. "Good to know," he said, his voice flat. "At least now there's nothing left to say." He turned and walked out, leaving her alone amidst the sterile luxury of the room. Every step he took away from her was a step toward himself, toward the man he was supposed to have been. He went upstairs to Lena's room. The girl was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes red from crying. Her fever had subsided, but her sadness remained. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I heard the yelling," she whispered, shrinking back. "That woman, she doesn't like me." Arthur pulled her into a hug, holding her tight, wanting to absorb all her pain and fear. "Don't you worry about her. She's going to be leaving. From now on, it's just you and me. And we're going to get Mommy back, I promise." He didn't sleep that night, sitting in his office, with the city asleep outside. He mapped out his plan of action. There was no more time for subtlety. He called his lawyer in the middle of the night, explaining the situation in clear, urgent terms. The first order of business: file for an emergency petition to establish paternity, with a DNA test to be done as soon as possible. The second, initiate divorce proceedings, offering Beatrice exactly what their prenuptial agreement stipulated, and not a penny more. He knew she would fight, but he would fight back, not for his net worth, but for his daughter. By dawn, he was in motion. While Lena was still asleep, looked after by Helena, Arthur went to the hospital. He pulled every string he could, calling contacts on the board of directors, ensuring that Eliza would be transferred to the ICU of the best private hospital in the city as soon as she was stable enough. He signed documents, personally guaranteeing all costs, acting with the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. The next challenge was the legal battle. As Beatrice had predicted, the news of his divorce and the paternity suit leaked to the press. The tabloids had a field day. The headlines were cruel, painting him as an irresponsible adulterer. His flagship company's stock began to fluctuate as uncertainty spooked investors. His partners called, concerned, demanding an explanation. He weathered the storm with a calm that surprised everyone, including himself. He issued a single, short public statement. "I am navigating a personal family matter, and my sole focus is the well-being of my daughter and her mother. I ask for respect and privacy at this difficult time." Beatrice, meanwhile, made good on her threat. Her legal team was relentless. They accused him of fraud, of hiding assets, of mental cruelty. They demanded a much larger share of the fortune, claiming she had been instrumental in building the empire. The court battle promised to be long, expensive, and humiliating. He would look at the piles of legal documents, at the notifications from his lawyers, and feel the crushing weight of it all. Losing half his assets was a real possibility. His reputation was in tatters. But then he would look at a photo he had taken of Lena, a shy smile gracing her face as they played in the garden, and he knew he was doing the right thing. Amidst it all, the private investigator's report arrived. It was a thick, detailed document. It confirmed Beatrice's blackmail of Eliza, with depositions from 2 other neighbors who had witnessed the elegant woman's visit years ago. And it contained the final bombshell. The doctor who had diagnosed him as sterile had received an anonymous investment in his private clinic, originating from an offshore holding company that the investigator had successfully traced back to Beatrice. The proof was irrefutable. The manipulation was total. With that document in hand, Arthur knew the game had changed. He was no longer just defending himself. Now he was ready to attack. With the investigator's dossier in hand, Arthur felt the ground beneath his feet solidify for the first time in weeks. The truth was his armor and his weapon. He scheduled a meeting with his lawyers, presenting the new evidence. The look on their faces shifted from professional concern to shock, and then to a predatory resolve. The battle was no longer about a messy divorce. It was about extortion, fraud, and deliberate manipulation. Beatrice's case, once strong in its narrative of a wronged wife, began to crumble. While the legal team prepared their offensive, Arthur focused on Lena and Eliza. Eliza had been successfully transferred to the private hospital. The best doctors in the city were attending to her. The high-risk procedure was performed, and though her recovery was slow, she was stable. Arthur spent hours by her bedside in the ICU, holding her hand, speaking to her in a low voice even if she couldn't respond. He told her about Lena, about how smart and brave she was. He asked for forgiveness for his ignorance, for not seeking her out, for not fighting harder for them. In those quiet moments, beside the woman he had never stopped loving, he felt a peace no amount of money could buy. Caring for Lena was his refuge and his greatest challenge. The girl, now aware that he was her father, began to open up slowly. She asked him questions about himself, about his life, about what he liked to do. Arthur, in turn, tried desperately to reclaim 7 lost years in a matter of days. He learned that her favorite food was mac and cheese, that she was afraid of the dark, and that she dreamed of having a dog. They were small, everyday details, but to him they were treasures, precious fragments of his daughter's life that he had been denied. The transition, however, wasn't easy. Lena had nightmares, waking up crying for her mother. Arthur learned how to soothe her, to sit by her bed until she fell asleep again. He, the man who commanded boardrooms with an iron fist, was learning the language of patience and tenderness. He helped her with the schoolwork she had brought in her small backpack, discovering she was brilliant at math, a trait she had surely inherited from him. The news of Eliza's improvement brought a ray of sunshine into their lives. She was moved from the ICU to a regular room. She was still weak, but she was conscious. The first time Arthur saw her awake, his heart stopped. Her eyes, though tired, were the same. There was confusion, fear, and 1,000 questions in her gaze. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice faint. What happened? Where's Lena?" "She's safe. She's with me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Eliza, I know everything. I know what Beatrice did. I'm so sorry. I would never have left you. Never." Silent tears streamed down Eliza's face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it seemed to ache. 7 years of pain, fear and loneliness began to dissolve in that single sentence. The following days were filled with fragmented conversations as Eliza regained her strength. She told her side of the story, the terror she felt when Beatrice threatened her, the belief that Arthur had abandoned her, the struggle to raise Lena alone with few resources, the pride that kept her from asking for help, and Arthur told her about his life, about the melancholy that never left him. about the lie of his sterility, about discovering the truth. As the connection between them was rebuilt, the war with Beatrice reached its climax. Her lawyers, confronted with the evidence of fraud, tried one last gambit, threatening to leak confidential information about Arthur's businesses. But he didn't back down. He was willing to lose the empire if he had to. What he was gaining was infinitely more valuable. He realized that true wealth wasn't in his assets or his net worth, but in the chance to have his family back. He authorized his lawyers to use the dossier. The bomb was about to explode, no longer on him, but directly on Beatrice. The climax wouldn't be in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion, where the reputation she valued so highly would be irrevocably destroyed. The day of the final confrontation didn't arrive with the bang of a battle, but with the calculated quiet of a checkmate. Arthur chose not to take the fight to the public arena of the tabloids, a decision that surprised his own lawyers. He didn't want to expose Lena and Eliza to a media circus. Instead, he arranged a final meeting with Beatrice and her legal team at a neutral mediator's office. The conference room was imposing, with a long, polished mahogany table and a panoramic view of the city, a fitting stage for the collapse of an empire built on lies. Beatrice swept into the room with her usual arrogance, dressed in an impeccable suit, her face a mask of confident disdain. She believed this was her last chance to intimidate him, to force a financial settlement that would leave her with a substantial fortune. She sat across from him, her lawyers flanking her like generals. "Let's get this over with, Arthur," she said, her voice sharp. "Give me what I want, and maybe I'll be generous and not drag your precious company's name through the mud." Arthur didn't reply. He simply nodded to his lead attorney. The man stood up and, without a word, placed a copy of the investigator's dossier in front of each member of Beatrice's team. A heavy silence fell as they flipped through the pages. Arthur watched Beatrice's face. The confidence wavered, the color draining from her cheeks. She saw the transcripts of the neighbors' depositions, the financial records tracing the payment to the doctor, the irrefutable proof of her fraud regarding his sterility. The house of cards she had so carefully constructed collapsed in an instant. Her lawyer cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "These are serious allegations. We'll need time to verify." "You don't," Arthur interrupted, speaking for the first time, his voice calm and lethal. "It's all been verified. The witnesses are ready to testify. The bank records are authentic. Your doctor's career is over, and so is yours, Beatrice." She stared at him, her eyes flashing with a mixture of panic and hatred. The woman who had always been in control, who had manipulated every aspect of his life, was completely cornered. She had no cards left to play. "What do you want, Arthur?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "Money? Revenge? Do you want to see me in prison?" Arthur shook his head slowly. "No, I want nothing from you. I don't need the money, and revenge wouldn't bring me back the 7 years you stole." He leaned forward, his gaze locked on hers. "I want you to disappear. You will sign the divorce papers, agreeing to the terms of our prenuptial agreement, which, as you know, Zhu, is quite modest. You will drop all lawsuits and countersuits, and you will never come near me, my daughter, or her mother ever again. If you do this, this dossier remains private. If you fight, it goes public tomorrow morning. The choice is yours." The ultimatum hung in the air, absolute and final. Beatrice looked to her lawyers, searching for an escape, a loophole, but they avoided her gaze. They knew the war was lost. Her reputation, her social standing, the image she had so meticulously cultivated, it all depended on her surrender. The irony was crushing. To save the facade of her life, she had to give up the fortune that had motivated her from the start. Slowly, her hands trembling with rage, she picked up the pen. The sound of the nib scratching against the settlement paper was the only noise in the room. She signed her name, not as the powerful wife of a multimillionaire, but as a defeated woman. As she stood to leave, she cast one last look at Arthur, a look that held the weight of all her malice and frustration. "You can have your little family back, you fool, but you'll never be one of us. You'll always go back to the gutter you came from." "The gutter, Beatrice," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. "That's where things grow. I'm fine with that." He watched her walk out of the room, a diminished figure, stripped of her power. He felt no triumph, only a deep, weary relief. The war was over. He had lost a significant portion of his assets, but he had won back his soul. He stood up, his mind already far from that room, far from business and battles. It was at the hospital with Eliza and at home with Lena. He was finally free to start building his true legacy. The weeks that followed Beatrice's surrender were like the slow awakening from a long nightmare. The divorce signing was a mere formality, the legal storm dissipating as quickly as it had formed. Beatrice vanished from his life and the social scene, choosing quiet exile over public humiliation. Arthur's empire, though shaken by the loss of assets in the settlement, remained standing, but he found his interest in the game of business had waned. Meetings about dividends and portfolio yields seemed trivial compared to the task of rebuilding his family. His first and greatest victory was Eliza's discharge from the hospital. She was still frail, moving with a care that betrayed the severity of what she had endured, but she was alive and recovering. Arthur brought her home, not to the cold, ghost-filled mansion, but to a smaller, cozier house he had rented in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was a place free of Beatrice's memory, a place where they could begin again. The reunion between Lena and Eliza was a moment of pure emotion Arthur would cherish forever. Lena ran into her mother's arms, and the two clung to each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Arthur watched from a distance, his heart overflowing. For the first time in 7 years, the void in his chest began to close. Life settled into a new routine, a normal rhythm that was more precious to him than all the gold in the world. He learned to make Lena breakfast, to clumsily braid her hair, to read her bedtime stories. He spent afternoons talking with Eliza on the porch, rediscovering the woman he loved, not as an idealized memory, but as a real person, with scars, fears, and a strength that awed him. They talked about everything, about the lost years, the pain, the misunderstandings. There were no accusations, only a shared sadness for the time that had been stolen from them. Eliza, in turn, saw the man Arthur had become, not the ambitious young businessman or the melancholic multimillionaire, but a devoted father and a kind man whose core had not been corrupted by wealth or pain. One day, as they sat in the garden watching Lena play on the swing set, Eliza took his hand. There was a hesitation in her eyes, a secret she still held. "Arthur," she began, her voice low, "there's one more thing you don't know. Something that happened after Beatrice came to see me." Arthur felt a knot form in his stomach. "What is it, Eliza?" She took a deep breath, her eyes welling up. "Back then, the pain of thinking you had abandoned me was terrible. I shut myself off from the world. But a few months after that last night of ours, I found out I was pregnant again. I was terrified. I couldn't tell you. I thought you hated me. I had no way to raise 2 children alone. I made the hardest decision of my life." Arthur's world stopped spinning. "What did you do, Eliza?" "My cousin, upstate, she couldn't have children," she continued, the tears flowing freely now. "They always wanted a family. I gave my baby to her to raise, a boy, so he could have a better life than I could give him. I never told anyone, only Joan knew." Arthur was utterly speechless. A second child, a son he never knew existed. The pain of the revelation was sharp, but it was quickly overcome by a wave of understanding and compassion for Eliza. The magnitude of her sacrifice, the depth of her suffering, was almost unbearable. He felt no anger, only an overwhelming sorrow for what they had both lost. "He's 7 now," she whispered. "His name is Lucas. In that moment, Arthur knew his journey of recovery was far from over. He had found his daughter, reconnected with the love of his life. And now he had a son to find. The family he thought was finally complete had one more missing piece, and he would not rest until they were all together. The ultimate victory wouldn't just be about reclaiming what was stolen, but about discovering what he never knew he had. The drive upstate, 3 days later, was filled with a silence charged with anticipation and nerves. Arthur drove, with Eliza beside him and Lena sleeping peacefully in the back seat. Every mile that took them away from the big city seemed to bring them closer to a truth that was both terrifying and wonderful. Eliza guided him down country roads, past green landscapes and simple houses, a world completely different from the one Arthur inhabited. Eliza's cousin's house was small, with a blooming garden and the smell of baking cake wafting through the air. A woman with a warm smile greeted them at the door, hugging Eliza tightly. And then, from behind her, a boy with brown hair and curious eyes, as large and expressive as Lena's, appeared. It was Lucas. Seeing him was like looking in a mirror to the past, a miniature version of himself. The shock of recognition was so powerful, Arthur had to lean against the doorframe. The meeting was delicate, handled with immense wisdom and love by Eliza's cousin and her husband. They explained to Lucas in simple terms that the man who had come to visit was his biological father, and that Eliza was his mother. They told him he had a sister. There was no drama, no tears, just the pure curiosity of a child. Lucas looked at Arthur, then at Lena, and a small smile formed on his lips. He had always known he was adopted. Their arrival wasn't a disruption, but a completion. Arthur spent the afternoon throwing a ball with his son in the backyard, a boy he hadn't taught to walk, whose first word he hadn't heard. The pain of lost time was real, but the joy of the present moment was far greater. He watched Lena and Lucas interact, the sibling connection sparking instantly, as if their hearts knew what their minds were just discovering. 6 weeks had passed since that Saturday morning when a dirt-streaked, desperate girl had knocked on his door with a letter. 6 weeks that had irrevocably transformed his life. The marble mansion was sold, as were most of his stocks and luxury assets. He kept enough to ensure his family's comfort and security, but he discovered he didn't need a fortune to be rich. His new house, the one he bought near Eliza's, was simple, but it was filled with laughter and the sound of small feet running down the hallways. He sat on the porch, watching Lena and Lucas play in the yard under the watchful eye of Eliza, who now had a healthy glow on her face. Her cousin and her husband had agreed, with incredible generosity of spirit, to move closer so the children could grow up together, sharing both their families. Love hadn't been divided. It had been multiplied. Arthur thought of Beatrice, the woman who had tried to destroy everything for greed. She had lost. She may have ended up with a piece of his money, but he had ended up with the treasure, the true inheritance. The letter Lena couldn't read was still tucked away in his drawer, a yellowed piece of paper that had become the most important document of his life. It had been the key that unlocked years of suffering, that freed a man from a gilded cage. The little girl who had begged for help had ended up saving them all, proving that the deepest truths often arrive in the smallest voices. Lena ran up to him, her face beaming. "Dad, look what I learned to write," she said, holding up a piece of paper on which, in proud, childish handwriting, was a single word: family. Arthur hugged her tightly, his heart filled with a peace he had never imagined possible. The tycoon who had lived a lie for 7 years discovered that the truth, however painful, was the only path to happiness. He looked up at the late afternoon sky, at his family together, and knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man in the world.